Good space time, y'all, and welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast, a source for educational insights into the world of Web3. In today's episode, we are speaking with Chad Barraford, the CTO of THORchain, who delve into a wide range of thought-provoking topics, including the early applications of AI and their potential impact, explore the concept of a 10-hour workweek, and discuss the shifting landscape of Web3 lending, including the dangers of DeFi designs. We delve into the importance of separating money from the state and address the challenges surrounding scalability. During our discussion, we also touch upon the role of crypto in advancing human rights and the significance of ethical development practices and the need for the crypto community to continuously explore new possibilities.
If you want the next evolutionary step in your product, ask your customers. If you want the next revolutionary step, ask yourself. In nature, 97% of all life is extinct, right? Only 3% actually exists in the world today. That's because of trial and error, try new things. Whoever is a validator or a relayer has to do it in an altruistic fashion because there's no way for that person to make an income. Now that's a scalability issue. Because obviously if you're doing one swap every 30 minutes, it's like, what are you even doing? I was like, oh, what's this about? And I looked into it, I'm like, well, that sounds like one of the worst things I've ever, one of the worst designs I've ever heard.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast. And I have with me today Chad from THORchain, the technical lead of THORchain, actually. Chad, hi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me on.
Yes, I'm glad having you on. I'm very good. How are you?
Good.
I hope it's a good time, not too late, not too early, not too cold, not too hot, not too...
We're right in the middle of the row there. We're doing well.
Yay. Chad, let me go with the traditional thing. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. And when I say that, it's not just to tell me and all the listeners what's your name, but feel free to add anything you want to that. What you do, what keeps you busy at daytime and nighttime. Well, nighttime may be safe, but all yours.
My name is Chad Barraford. I'm technical lead on THORchain project. I don't know what else about me. I'm a world traveler. I like to climb. I used to run, although not so much these days. Don't have time for it. But, do whatever I do the best I can to get along with life.
What? Let me help you out. So what's going on technically, not just technically, but in general? What is currently keeping you busy at work at THORchain? What are you working on these days?
These days, it's primarily a lot of my time's focused around a lending design and protocol that we're trying to put out there. So that's very exciting because this lending design is just very different, structurally very different than everything else we've seen in the space. And this one actually uniquely has the ability to do 0% interest, never to liquidate. So there's no liquidations whatsoever. And there's no expiration of your loan as well. You can keep it open for as long as you want. And so that's a very unique attributes to a lending design. And it's just fundamentally the way it's designed and structured is just very, very different than everything else we've seen in the space. So it allows us to do things that most protocols can't.
Well, two things come to mind. First, the word lending, as in the landing page. And I remember a couple of years ago, THORchain had the craziest landing page. I might ask you about that, but feel free to. It's like a relevant thing. Another thing, when you say lending, as in to lend with zero and blah, 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 straight away, like kind of, being a cosmonaut and all that, alarm bells. Tarada, what do you mean 0%? What are we going to do? We're going to die.
Yeah.
Can you maybe explain a little bit?
Yeah. I get what you're saying. It's good to have healthy skepticism. So I always encourage people just to actually read about the concept of the design. I know it doesn't make sense because in the traditional DeFi sense, right? If you have no liquidations, for example, what you hear is, it can go, there's no liquidations, then it becomes insolvent and the whole thing collapses, blah, blah, blah. That's the thing, which I get that. It's just designed and structured very, very differently. It's like when Elon talked about, creating a new car that had an electric motor instead of a gasoline one. A lot of people are like, oh, what do you mean there's no pistons? Like, how would the car ever be able to go? How can you not, you know what I mean? Like this, it's just like if you're applying the old logic of what you think about automobiles, and then you're talking about something completely different, although they structurally do the same thing. They're both cars to get you from point A to point B, but the way they work fundamentally is different. And so you try to apply the old thinking to the new design. It just becomes, just breaks your brain in a sense. So this design is structured very, very differently. So it's able to do things that nobody else can. So when we talk about no liquidations, no expiration, and no interest rates, that is literally what it means.
A joke comes to mind. I'm sorry. I'm going to go with it. I'm sorry. It's a terrible joke. I really apologize to everybody for saying that. But the idea was something like, like a university, engineering university invites all of its professors for a free flight, let's say, I don't know, New York to California, whatever.
Yep.
And, just before they board everybody up, all the professors, all the engineering professors and all the flight school professors and everybody, just before the flight takes off, there's an announcement. Oh, by the way, we forgot to tell you, this plane was designed by your students. So suddenly you see like everybody running out the plane, and just one guy staying there. Just one guy, just one professor, he stays. And, they come up to him and say, so why didn't you run? He says, well, if my students are going to design this ain't taking off. So I'm safe about it, So, yeah, of course it's a joke, but...
Yeah. Well, I mean, us as a project, we've done some pretty incredible things in the space. Like we actually did deliver cross-chain swaps in a completely decentralized way. We delivered on, single asset yield, for example. We delivered on proving the slip-based fee model, which we created, works very effectively. So we have the track record to say that you shouldn't just like discount us out the door.
Absolutely.
Do the research, read about it. I've created an hour-long video that we can link to in this show notes or whatever later on.
Yes, please.
That digs into into some depths, not to the the nitty-gritty, but just the high level explaining how it all functions and works, which is a very complicated concept unto itself. So do your research. If you think it's too good to be true, excellent. Come on by, read about it, explain to me why it doesn't work. I'd be happy to listen to you. I've already heard, 100 people try this thing and almost nobody's been successful to actually understand how it wouldn't work.
Perfect. No, it's good. It's good because our goal is always to try to get the guests to be a bit more passionate about what they do. So I like that you're coming up with those answers. I love it. And definitely let's link that up. But generally, Chad, because I know I've heard, we haven't met personally, but I've heard interviews with you before. And actually you have done an interview 2 years ago for Jack Zampolin on our YouTube channel. I've read other things from you, and I know how passionate about those designs and about your work. And let me take the question a bit more general, maybe. At what point, in your opinion, is a DeFi design or a DeFi design, whatever way you pronounce that, becomes too dangerous? Like at what point me, a user, I forget about THORchain, for example. Let's go general here.
Mm-hmm.
What stage am I saying to myself, wait a second, stop. This might work, might not, but at which point is it too dangerous?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask. I think it's the imperative of us as a community, as a crypto community, to experiment and explore. You might think that some design or idea is too dangerous, right? And if you hold that position, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That just means that you don't invest in that particular token. But we should always encourage people to say, I don't really agree with what you're doing. I don't think it'll work, but I think it's worth trying. I think it's worth to exploring it. And if it doesn't work, we'll find out why and how it doesn't work. And if that happens, we learn a lesson as a community, right? Like Terra was doing the UST design, and there were a lot of people saying it would work, and there were a lot of people saying it wouldn't work. But the reality is, we don't know which one's correct and which one's not correct until you actually do the thing and try it out in the real world, right? And either it'll float or it'll sink. But in either case, we will learn a breadth of information and knowledge that the rest of the community can say, you know what, that algo stable design didn't work because X, Y, and Z, and that other algo stable design didn't work because of A, B, and C. And every time somebody tries something and fails, we always learn something from it so we can grow and evolve. This is what's great about DeFi, is that we don't have to ask permission to experiment and try new things. We will grow as an industry exponentially. We will evolve so efficiently and so quickly, much faster than the TradFi world could ever even dream of accomplishing. We can do that because of this freedom of experimentation. So I always say there is no limit to what what is too dangerous of a design, as long as you're very clear and honest and transparent to the community about what is happening. If you're hiding information, if you're this little secret bit of code being executed over here that nobody knows about, or this kind of thing, or it's owned and operated by a single entity that can just rug pull the whole fucking thing over, that's a completely different thing. But even with Terra, Dogecoin was clear, the design was clear, the code was open source, everybody was available to know all the bits of information, and if you invested into it and it didn't work out, that's just what investment is. Sometimes you invest in projects and they don't work out, and that's okay too. I mean, it's not okay if you lose a bunch of money. Obviously, I feel a sorrow for those people who did, but other than Dogecoin's kind of attitude on Twitter, which was a little bit kind of harsh, I think what he did was experimenting an idea and a concept, and it didn't work. And that's okay.
I absolutely agree with you. I agree.
Take, for example, that in nature, 97% of all life is extinct, right? Only 3% actually exists in the world today. That's because of, trial and error. Try new things. Some things work. Deer with bright pink spots does not really work so well. They're all going to die out, right? But that's okay if things are failing. What we care about is what things are, what we're learning for, and how we're growing as a community.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that, well, personally, I have lost like a bit of money. The project has suffered a lot with UST, but still, and I've been around crypto for a while, since pretty much the very beginning. My saying always goes, the difference between a scammer and not a scammer, and this is what blockchain has allowed us to do, is saying I'm a scammer.
Yep.
Like if I'm in blockchain, which is completely open source and everything is open, and not just the code, but if everything you're doing is exactly what it is, and I'm saying, hey, I'm planning to fuck some people over. This is what I'm planning to do. If you're following me because you're greedy and you want to make some money, don't be calling me a scammer later. Yes, I says I'm a scammer straight away. Of course, it's not the correct thing to do. I wouldn't do that.
Right, of course.
But I think we should all be responsible for our own actions. So I totally agree with what you say there.
Right. I mean, FTX would be the opposite of that, right? Like that's a scammer. That's rugging a bunch of people. That's completely horrible.
Yes.
That's very different from what I consider Dogecoin, which was trying an idea and it didn't work out, unfortunately.
Dogecoin is an ass. Dogecoin is an ass. I must say that because I've been in contact with him for some years, and some things I've seen him say and heard some personally, to me at least. And he's a bit of an ass, but I don't think he's a scammer. Definitely not.
Yeah.
He's a bit of
I can see that.
In fact, it's funny. Me, a friend of mine in crypto, we did like a scammer ladder, and we had like 5 or 6 layers of how to understand. But anyways. Wait, before we get to go into that.
Yeah.
I want to go back to you. So talking about dangers, though, I know that, and this might be a bit of a strange question to you now, but I know that back in 2011, you were already working with smart homes. And I think it was called Jarvis, right? This is what I managed to find on the internet.
Yep.
This is going to be a very strange question. And of course, let's talk a little bit about it. I would love to hear how you got from that to doing THORchain. You know what? Let's start with that, and then I will get to the question.
Okay.
So first of all, how did you get from 2011 from Jarvis at Smart Host to THORchain? And then I will go with the danger.
So Jarvis was kind of like an AI that I built a long time ago, back in 2010, 2011, what it was. And that was like really my first real software project. Like I was actually wanted to learn how to code. And at that time, the language that I had learned was AppleScript, which was kind of a funny little language, right? And so I had to learn how to code in other languages. This is like my first time getting into it. And so I had seen the movie Iron Man in 2008, right, with Robert Downey Jr., right? And so there's a Jarvis character, if you may remember. I thought that was really fascinating. And I thought it was really cool about having what I call a PDA back then, a personal digital assistant. That's what I referred. This is like pre-Siri. This is like like all this kind of stuff, right? So I had coined this phrase, a personal digital assistant. And so, I could talk to Jarvis through my voice, through text, tweets. I had remote controls. I had all sorts of different things for him. And it just was an exploration of like, if your house had a Twitter account, what would it tweet? What would it say? Right? Like, it was just kind of like, as I came in contact with things like, oh, I want to track a package being mailed to me. Oh, I'm getting a migraine. I want Jarvis to help me, with my migraines. And, I want to know when Netflix sends me this is back when DVDs were like a physical media. Back a few years ago. And so I would let me know when small things happen on my internet accounts, whether it be Netflix or my bank accounts or like this kind of thing. Like, hey, Chad, there was a deposit into your bank account of $2,100 or something like this. And it was like a fun little exploration of just like computational science, right? I kind of got fascinated by the idea of computational science in the sense of like solving really difficult problems. And so that was my first one. I got my 15 minutes of fame, quote unquote. I was in Gadget and Gizmodo, and I think Cracked wrote an article about me. I was invited to speak at various universities and colleges in the Northeast just to kind of share the thing that I spent a year building. And then I moved on to other projects. I started to get into like, well, what are other some kind of fascinating topics to do? And so I got hit a bunch of times for some like, Twitter spam, asked me to click a link to some scammy thing, whatever the hell it is. And so I built what I call Twitter Spam Assassin, which was just like processing the main timeline, right, of Twitter and analyzing each individual tweets for the statistical likelihood of them being spam. And so I started reporting on a mass quantity to Twitter, like all these spam accounts. And they reached out to me. The security team reached out to me. And they're like, hey, what you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I was annoyed by all the spam on your network. I wanted to just, report it all.
This is hilarious.
So I wrote this is where I learned Python program, by the way, just for this particular project. And I built a multitude of servers all working in tandem. This is like high performance Python compute. This is my exploration, my academic sandboxing of high performance Python computing on a distributed system concept, right? Because there's a lot of timelines, like a lot of stuff. And so they reached out. We had a conversation. They wanted to know what my heuristics were, like what are my algos. And I just gave it to them. I didn't really care. I don't know if they actually used them or not, or whatever. I don't really know, but I just gave them how I structured my design.
This is fascinating.
And then they gave me like unique access to their API. Like my Twitter account has like super access to like, like high, I can do high throughput. And so once they gave me high throughput of like API access to it, I could start like really like, cause I had a problem. I would hit I get rate limited by the API. So I had to be very smart about which tweets do I want to get more detailed history from that particular user, which ones I do not, because I don't want to waste an API request. But once they gave me like advanced access to their API, I just like, all right, let's turn this shit up to a fucking 11. Just crank the fucking dial. In the end, I think I found like almost like 1 million spammers on their network or something like this. It was actually a really fun project before I shut it down.
That's crazy. It's crazy. But how did you progress then from finding 1 million spammers on Twitter, getting like a super access account on Twitter to THORchain? Wait, we lost there. Wait.
So after that point, I started to actually work I was actually working in the tech industry before that point. I mean, I worked in the IT industry, which is a little bit different. And so I got a job at a place called Bright Cove, which was kind of like a YouTube for business. Let's call it that for simplicity's sake. And I got hired there as a job as an infrastructure guy, actually, not as a coder, but as doing like servers and infrastructures. Just what we call system engineering, right? I did that for a few years before I got bored of it. And then I went on to another company, eventually going to a company called RStudio, which was actually my first time doing dev work professionally, being paid to actually write code. Before that, it was mostly infrastructure, which is, again, infrastructure as code is still technically code, but like it's a little bit different. And so I worked for a company called RStudio for about 6 years, and I helped build their flagship products. And so RStudio Connect and what was called Shiny Apps IO at the time, although I think it's called RStudio Cloud today, I wrote all that code with one or two other devs. And that was kind of my first time building things professionally within a corporate environment mentality. And, eventually I quit just because I got into crypto. In 2017, I discovered cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all this stuff. And I quit the job and I worked as a for hire dev for basically 10 hours a week because I was living in Southeast Asia at the time for the most part. It's cheap to live out there. So I didn't really need that much, many hours to work. I could just work a few hours and live life and explore other countries and such. And then eventually, actually, this is slightly embarrassing, but it'd be an interesting story.
Drum rolls.
So drum rolls. So I was working 10 hours a week, and I don't know if you know this, but American tax law, if you live outside of the country for 330 days of the year, you don't have to pay income tax, right? So I was living on 10 hours a week of income, not really expecting to pay much income tax because, I was outside the country for 330 days. And then I realized later on that only applies to W-2 income, does not apply to 1099 income. Oh shit, I'm fucked, right? So I was living in Germany at the time, I was in a startup competition for a friend of mine who asked me to come out and just build their prototype for him. And I owed the government some taxes, which I wasn't expecting to owe them. I didn't have much money at the time. I was basically pretty close to broke. And the government went in my bank account, took everything I had. This is a true story. Literally put my bank account into a negative balance, my checking account into a negative balance. Because I just woke up one day and all of a sudden, literally every dollar I had was just like gone out of my bank account, right? So I'm like panicking. So I go on my PayPal and my Venmo and like random places like this on the internet to try to get my bank account back into a positive. So I think I had like $600 at that point, right? $600 to my name. This is true. $600 to my name. I'm in Germany. I'm working at a job that doesn't actually pay me because I was just doing it as a favor for a friend to build their prototype. So I didn't even have an income at that time. They just gave me a place to stay in, this is in Leipzig, Germany. So all right, shit, I got $600 to my name. I'm kind of fucked, right?
Fuck.
And so thank you, government, for, taking all my money. I appreciate that. That was great. So I started looking for a job, but of course I was in the crypto space and I wanted to stay in the crypto space. And so I started looking for stuff on like some AngelList website or whatever the hell it was. And I found this the CTO job for a company called Sky Network, SKYY, .network, and they were looking for a CTO to help them build what they were doing, which was basically like air traffic control on a blockchain. That's the simplest way to probably explain. So like the drones could fly in airspace and have agreement upon who's going to occupy what part of the airspace at any given moment, so that they could communicate with each other to figure out like how drones are going to fly in the sky without ramming into each other, in a hypothetical future. And so the CEO of that company and the advisor of that company were going to be in Berlin at the time, and I had just moved to Berlin like a few weeks earlier, and they were like, "Oh, we're coming to Berlin. We're doing this Cosmos hackathon. This is in July 2019. Why don't you come out? And this will be like your job interview. Like this is like we'll come out, we'll hack for a couple days. We'll see how it goes." I'm like, all right, well, this is very convenient. So yeah, I'm already in Germany. I'll see you next week. Let's do it. And at that time, I actually didn't know anything about Cosmos. I hadn't learned about Cosmos yet, right? And so I read the Cosmos documentation like the day before the hackathon, just to kind of brush up, try to understand the SDK and how it all works and functions. And so the advisor and I were spent the most time together. Him and I were hacking away at some things. And he kind of asked me like, "Oh, what do you want to build?" And I was like, I don't know, what should we build? And he said, "Oh, well, I had this idea last year that didn't work out. There's this thing, like this cross-chain swap concept that the Cosmos didn't exist yet, and threshold signatures weren't existing yet, all that stuff." And it's like, "Would you want to work on this?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually sounds like a really good idea." So we hacked on it for 2 weeks, and we were one of the winners of the hackathon from that event. And that was the first, that was the birth of THORchain in a sense, right? That was the first lines of code were committed at that point. The BEP2 token was created and minted, I think, a week later or 2 weeks later, something like that. We got a few investors. We had about 1.5 million, I think, initially, or 700 plus another 700, like a few weeks later, something like this, of investment. And that was all we needed. Like we never hired a big team. Like we don't have 100 devs like some other projects in the space do. The most we've ever had within the original team was maybe 9 at the height, right? Which is still quite small.
It's not a lot. No, it's not a lot.
It's not a lot. Like the actual chain itself, the THORchain chain, was built by myself and one other dev, and that was 2 years of work to get it there, to even get to what we called single chain chaos net, which was just an alpha release. Like, let's just connect with Binance Chain only and prove the technology works, prove that the economics of like the slip-based fee model, prove that all this stuff actually works in reality. And then we'll scale up to mainnet, which took us another 1.5 or 2 years to get there, right? So it's been a long road to get where we are now, but it's been a lot of energy and effort.
We were in Leipzig and in Berlin at the same time. I was around there in 2000. And in fact, a lot of my guests that come on the show ended up in Germany in 2018, 19, 20, obviously due to the same reasons.
Yep.
So ironically that a lot of us have only meeting years and years later, but it's, the wheels of life, I guess. But wait. I have a question now, back to the question, because
yeah, shoot.
Now that you give me more of your background, I'm more and more sure that this question is very good for you.
Okay.
So considering you have DevOps and infrastructure experience, not just experience, not any experience, but particular experience building even your own things like Jarvis, considering myself being a validator and considering a lot of validators these days, and some of them listen to this show, I know that, try to move away from cloud and slowly start more and more experimenting with not just in the name of decentralization, but also in the name of security and decentralization with bare metal. And by bare metal, I don't mean bare metal in the cloud. I mean, home bare metal. Considering though our lives now, a parallel second thought, more and more in our lives, smart devices and things like, lamps or Jarvis or, its future, today's ancestors. Sorry, not ancestors, but the children, more and more in our life. So long story short, you already probably guessed the question. The question is, how are people who are either trading cryptocurrencies, holding validators in the houses, of course, they should be aware of those things. But how do you make sure that smart network devices don't become a danger to the house network and cannot be accessed, especially if you're doing something sensitive like validating, like trading and so on and so forth? What is your advice in that direction, if any?
That really is a networking question, I suppose.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a bit of a networking question.
yeah, because within your house, you have lots of devices. Some are IoTs, so the Internet of Things, like your refrigerator might be an IoT device, for example, or your fan or whatever, right? Baby monitors. And then you have your devices, right? Which is like usually your laptops and your iPhones and your iPads and things of that kind of context. And then you have other kind of systems in there, like might be an Xbox, PlayStation, these kind of things. And then you might have services you're running that you want to secure. It might be a validator, it might be a full node, it might be, maybe if you're hosting a validator, it means you have a public IP address that's kind of communicating with other validators. And so you have an entry point into your network, right? So if there's an exploit within that validator, whatever it might be, like an overflow or something of this nature, whatever you can do, and break through one of those kind of ports in a matter of speaking and get like, an RCE, that's obviously a problem. So the trick to all those things is all those things can become malicious, right? An IoT device can be exploited because their security in those things tend to be very, very small. And we've seen that Russia do that many a times. You can download malware or some sort of thing on your laptop or your phone that could cause something. And also this service you're running that needs external access can also be a point entry into your network. So the cleanest way to do that is just creating what we call VLANs or virtual networks. And so that you isolate the traffic between things. So you don't actually allow your IoT devices to get direct access to your laptop, but your laptop can get access to the IoT devices, that kind of stuff. So anything, if I was running a bare metal node in my house, something like this, then I would probably just make sure the network is actually separated entirely. And I may even go the extra step of actually creating a second ISP for that purpose, just so that the bandwidth that I'm utilizing in my house when I'm, BitTorrenting something or using something that uses a lot of network, it doesn't infringe on the network of that validator and it causes the validator to slow down and maybe collect slashes or something like this. Like, it's a difficult thing to do, and it does require a technical knowledge, understanding to do that in a secure way. And if you don't do it in a secure way, you're running your own risk, right?
It's crazy how much time and effort those things require, especially when our lives become more and more involved with smart devices. Sometimes you don't understand you have a smart device until you sometimes go on your network and you're like, whoa, where is all that coming from? Of course, being a validator, you're more aware of those things, being like technically up to date, so to speak. But I think what you're saying is very important for anybody out there who isn't just running a validator. But I think if you're doing crypto, I think having separate networks, like you say, for doing your business with crypto is, in my opinion, essential,
Yep.
And I don't know, it's getting more and more becoming part of our life, I guess.
Absolutely.
What about scalability and Tendermint and how you guys solve this maybe in THORchain? Because, Tendermint has allowed for many things that were not there before it. IBC being one of them, which is another topic I will want to get with you before we finish.
Sure.
But I don't know, because I'm going to be honest, I am with THORchain. I don't have as much knowledge of THORchain. I have experience using THORchain, but it's not as much as I would like to make a comment on. So my question is, I know that you guys have some twitches to the scalability, or am I wrong here?
So in single chain chaos, we had a limit of validators. I think that the limit was at 35 or 36, right? And the reason why that is because when it's securing external assets, exogenous capital, that's Bitcoin, Ethereum, like layer one real assets on some other blockchain, it needs a wallet to store in that is, connects to their BC1 address or an OX address or something like that. And the way that THORchain uses something called threshold signatures, which is a relatively new cryptographic primitive, right? It's kind of like a multi-sig, but a little bit different. And with a threshold signature, the more members in that group of people that are signing, you have a quadratic relationship to the time it takes to sign and the number of people. So if you have 36 people or so in a threshold signature, it'll probably take but 15 seconds or so, maybe 20 seconds or so to sign, right? But if you were to scale up to 100 people, which you totally can, it would take minutes, maybe 15, 30 minutes, right, to sign a single transaction. Now that's a scalability issue. Because obviously if you're doing one swap every 30 minutes, it's like, what are you even doing, right? It's like, it's pretty much useless. So in the initial version of THORchain, all the validators also had to be a part of the same, what we called ASGAR, the same threshold signature, in order to do this. We had a limit on the initial thing to be 35 or 36 validators. That's not true today. Today we have just multiple threshold signatures. Each one has 20 members per, what we call it, Asgard Vault. I think there's about 5 or 6 in total, something like this. And so we have close to 100 validators on the THORchain. So we can scale up to whatever Tendermint will allow us to. Whatever the max that Tendermint allows, which that's debated in the community. Some people say 150, some people say 250. It's probably right around that area somewhere. I think Cosmos Hub has the most at whatever that is. I think it's like 200 something.
I think it's 175.
Yeah, almost just shy of 200. I think they have the most validators on any given set.
Omniflix, I think, went on their testing. They went to something crazy. Like, I don't know how they did it and how it worked, but it was something like 500, 600. I don't ask me questions.
Yeah.
I will not be able to say anything, but I know they were doing experiments, and I would like to talk to them one day about it to see what are those experiments and what are they doing there.
Actually, I was talking to a guy named Michael O'Rourke, who's the guy behind Pocket Network. And he was telling me that he forked the Tendermint Cosmos SDK, and I don't know what he changed. He didn't explain it to me. That he could get like 30,000 validators.
30,000.
That's what he said to me. So like, maybe I misunderstood him. Hopefully I did. But like,
how did he test it?
Excellent question. I don't know the answer to it. He did tell me he was going to rip it out though and drop Cosmos and use another framework that's called Hot Stuff that Facebook created.
Okay.
Which I've never used that one personally or know that much about it. But he said he was going to rebuild Pocket Network off of Cosmos and move to this other thing called Hot Stuff.
I've heard of Pocket Network. I've never heard. I mean, I heard Hot Stuff, the song. Yeah. I know the song Hot Stuff, baby. The same. So,
I think it's a bit different.
Damn.
It's an open source blockchain framework for that Facebook came out with.
Yes. I don't know much about it. I've heard the name. I've never read the documentation.
Yeah. I never looked at it.
Okay, cool to know though. Cool, something to explore. Maybe I can go and try to talk to him to invite him on to see if he wants to talk about it. You know what other topic I've seen that is you kind of touch on a lot. No, before we go to that, wait. Sorry. Before we go to that, I will be not myself if I don't ask that. THORchain and IBC. Can you briefly give me like a 101 on the whole deal or why? And I'm sorry if I'm getting anything wrong here, but as far as I'm aware, THORchain doesn't want to be IBC enabled, right? I have heard this somewhere before. Mm-hmm. Could you give me and all the listeners like the 101 as to why that is?
Yes. So IBC was something that myself and other people were actually very interested in integrating for a long period of time. And we worked on it for months, myself as well as the Nine Realms team, which is another kind of dev team that's associated with THORchain. And we found that it just didn't really do what we needed it to do, right? In the sense that it didn't uphold the standards of what we require for decentralization, right? Because IBC requires a relayer, which is oftentimes, one of Jack's servers and his strange stuff, which is nothing wrong with that. It just, for us, we wanted to make sure that we did not rely on any single entity to do anything, right? And so it also came with there's some security issues around whoever is a validator or a relayer has to do it in an altruistic fashion because there's no way for that person to make an income. And as well, they have to spend gas on both chains to make this whole thing work. And so there's always the risk of them getting spammed with just, burning gas. And so there's some elements to it that didn't make sense for us. And I think they'll fix those things. I think they're already down the road of fixing those issues, those bugs. I'm sure IBC is going to get a lot stronger in the future. As well as the other thing was that we already have a bridging model that we designed called Bifrost, right? And Bifrost is very different in terms of how it's structured, how it works than how IBC works. And there are a lot of advantages to IBC over Bifrost, and there's advantages of Bifrost over IBC. But for our purposes, in case what we're trying to accomplish, we want to be able to connect with any chain in the world. Didn't care if it's an IBC, a Cosmos chain, or a Polkadot chain, or a crypto note, or a UTXO, or EVM, or whatever. It could be even something, crazier, IOTA is not even really a blockchain in some sense, or, it's structured very differently. So we wanted to be able to be much more flexible to connect the world, because if we just connected a bunch of, Cosmos chains together, that wouldn't solve the problem that we're trying to solve, which was true cross-chain connectivity, right? That makes sense within the Cosmos space, but for us, we wanted to not forget about Bitcoin first. Bitcoin's obviously the elephant in the room, right? Obviously, that's the most valuable asset. It's the one people want to be trading the most. That's the one we wanted to kind of help. So even after all that, we talked about doing IBC for the Rune asset specifically, and not using it for the pools and the swaps and that kind of thing, but using it just for the Rune asset. But then that became a couple of problems with that in the sense that it goes against some of the security concepts of the postures of THORchain. So THORchain delays its outbound transactions up to 1 hour, as a safeguard to protect itself from some sort of exploit. So if somebody were to exploit THORchain right now and try to steal, $50 million, the outbound transaction to receive that $50 million would be delayed for an hour. That would give the community time to like, whoa, hey, like there's alerts that go on in our Discord that notify the community when something kind of weird like that happens. So it's there for security purposes so that funds are never lost, right? And IBC becomes a problem. Value can leave the network very, very efficiently and quickly. We don't want that. We want to have a more secure posture. And then if that's not enough, to support multiple bridges on a network, it just creates more surface area of exposure, right? As a dev, you have to understand how Bifrost works. As a dev, you have to understand how IBC works. You have the surface area of security issues with both Bifrost and IBC. IBC had a security issue, not too long ago. Again, I'm not like judging or anything like that. Everything's going to have security issues because everything's just code that's being baked. But like, we don't want to overexpose ourselves to more surface area or risk because we already have such extreme surface area risk to begin with Bifrost, with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, with Litecoin, with everything else, our own chain, our own math and logic. Like, there's already enough surface area of security to be concerned about. To add another bridge on top of that just seems like unnecessary.
Do you think that after IBC will fix the things that you're mentioning, or some of them, or it might have another look, will you guys be open to, you guys, when I say you guys, of course, we're talking about a whole network governance, but in your opinion, we're talking right now, Chad, we're not talking about THORchain and knowledge token holders.
Yeah, so I'm open to doing that. I would not want to do it for the layer 1 assets. I think, but how the Bifrost works is the way we want it to work, right? I'd be open to do it for the Rune asset and sending the Rune asset external, or maybe some of our synths or other assets on the network to have synthetic Bitcoin, for example, or synthetic Ethereum or Ether rather. That I'm open to doing so, but we also need to have a customized that IBC because I want to make sure we ensure the security. So I want to delay those outbound transactions. If you want to send Rune to some other chain, I want it to delay it up to an hour based upon some mathematics that determines how long it's delayed for. So there'd be some kind of custom rolling that would need to happen. And we need to figure out how the relayer would be run. Like, we can't just have me run a relayer in my basement and that be the relayer. Like, that just doesn't adhere to the centralization requirements. We'd have to get each individual validator to also be a relayer so that if any one of them are around, then everything would still work and function just fine. So if they fix all these kind of things and I think they already are, which is great, I'd be open to doing it. But again, it's not my choice per se. It's up to a larger community.
Devil's advocate question. You mentioned like the dangers of relayers sometimes, and it's kind of obvious, but you mentioned validators in the same sentence. Same thing, isn't it? I mean, validator is still the same centralized, dangerous entity, isn't it?
Well, no, it's different because in most of the time, there are relayers just like there's only one relayer. In most scenarios, maybe two if you're lucky, right? And so if one of those relayers goes offline for some purpose, or if that one relayer says, I don't like this address for some reason, right? And I want to block this address because I'm going to adhere to the OFAC something or other, or whatever it might be, that's different. But a validator is different because anybody can become a validator, anybody can leave as a validator, and else can come right back in. And there's close to 100 of them, lying around. So if one relayer goes down or one relayer says, I don't want to transact this address and blacklist this address, then some other relayer will do it. And so I hope that they actually change how IBC itself works and that validators are the relayers. Either that or everybody becomes their own relayer. Like I can go to a UI, do a transaction, and I become my own relayer between the two chains. That would be another really valid way of going at it. Hopefully they're going to be doing that at some point in time. But get rid of, and I don't mean this negatively against Jack, but get rid of Jack and Strangelove in that sense. Like they should not be running relayers for the entire community. Like that just, if that doesn't set off red flags in your head, it probably should. And so we should instead improve IBC's design to allow the validators of individual networks to do it, or for everybody to be their own relayer for their own transaction that they're doing in the whatever UI they're interacting with. Do one of those two things and you solve a lot of the issues.
Are you referring to a little bit what IOTA is doing?
I don't know what IOTA is doing, so maybe I am, maybe not.
Okay, no. I'm not gonna go into it because technically, well, they are, but then they have the what's it called? The thing that is actually helping because it's not scalable enough. Basically, when you do a transaction, you have to validate two transactions next to you. And that basically creates that each device, like this is in a very cut-in corners right now, right?
Yeah.
And then basically creates a network where you have to validate transactions in order to make a transaction. So that's kind of everybody being a relayer. And yeah, it doesn't really work for them. That's why they're still solving all this problem. And then they have like, I forgot what they call it, but it's a centralized kind of relayer that does those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I understand what you mean. It would be interesting to see that. To be honest, I'm hoping to see a very good proof of an implementation of some type of proof of work on top of proof of stake that will help to scale, because I can think of them, but yeah, I haven't seen anything like that yet. Not with today's cryptography.
It'd be fascinating to see somebody come up with a design that kind of mixed multiple. I mean, it'd be complicated to sell for obvious reasons, and the security would be hard to keep tight. But
yes, the cryptography is not there. Yeah, for sure. Chad, because we are like a bit of like, so on time, I'm gonna go to the last question. It's a blitz of 3 questions. So you don't have to answer them super quickly, but it is a blitz. So first one, give me 3 projects that you're technically interested in. Please don't say THORchain. Please don't say Cosmos or Bitcoin or Ethereum. But 3 projects that you're technically interested in, that you saw it like, wow, that's pretty cool.
I'm hesitant to come to speak about other projects just because I don't want to put my weight behind something.
No financial advice. This is something you're technically interested in, like only technically.
Oh, from a technical perspective, I'm interested in Lightning Network. I think that's one of the most important projects in crypto. I think that's really quite fascinating. I actually started working on a new project myself outside of THORchain that's called Archeo, which is decentralizing the access to node data, right? To get access to Ethereum full nodes and Bitcoin full nodes without being KYC'd or asking permission or any kind of centralized service whatsoever. That's another one I'm obviously interested in. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's really kind of fascinating. I mean, I always see things happening in the space, and 99% of the time, I'm just like, yep, that's not going to work.
I know what you mean.
That sounds, or maybe it's going to work, but it's just because it's a fork of something else, and it doesn't really offer anything interesting or unique, and so it just becomes, like
people forget about computing laws when they talk about blockchain sometimes,
I was looking at like Canto yesterday because it was I saw a bunch of tweets in my feed or whatever. I was like, oh, what's this about? And I looked into it. I'm like, well, that sounds like one of the worst things I've ever one of the worst designs I've ever heard.
I haven't checked that out yet, but I have seen my Twitter feed is starting to like, Cantor's got more than 100,000 accounts. Cantor's got 1 million accounts. And you're like, okay.
Nah, man.
Yeah, I see where it's going. Okay.
I read up on it. No.
Okay. I feel you, bro.
Yeah.
Second one, give me 2 things in your daily life that keep you motivated to keep on building, the decentralized world, to keep on building DeFi tools and designing new things. Something that keeps you motivated. 2 things in your daily life.
For me, it's like the value of crypto in general to me is not about money or getting rich or these things, although obviously those things are a thing too. I mean, for like Eric Voorhees, for example, he talks about separating money from state, right? Which is a very noble and valuable thing to do. But for me, what makes me excited about the space is not so much that, also that is very important. For me, it's about human rights. The idea that we're granting new financial instruments or usability of services that are just public goods. They exist purely to support humanity and allow humanity in a way to interact and empower them, right? Like doing in a way that does not know or care what your, if you're old or young, black or white, male or female, polka dotted or whatever, like there's no way to treat those people differently than anybody else. And so when I talk about crypto, what I talk about often is like, we are literally granting inalienable human rights for the entire planet all at the same time. Not just these group of people who are born in these borders and those group of people who were born in those borders, but across the space, across the spectrum, across every man, woman, child, across this entire planet. And granting them access to yield, checking and savings accounts, loans and lending, Archeo's node data. I don't know, like anything, right? That is so critically important. So that's what gets me excited about the space. That's what, when I think about things I want to build, that's what I think about. I was like, how does this, what hair on fire problem are we solving by, that we're trying to solve? THORchain did that by getting rid of centralized exchanges from being required to move across chains, right? Archeo is doing it by removing, Infura and similar services from being able to spy on you, even that project wants to move forward and decentralize the rest of the application after the protocol, right? Including getting rid of domain names, including getting rid of websites and centralized points of UIs. Completely decentralize the entire stack of every DeFi application, from the protocol, the smart contract, or whatever, or the Cosmos chain, whatever it might be, to the front end, and literally everything in between of those two things, and decentralize everything. Because just a few weeks ago, Congress was talking about, KYC in the front ends. Fuck no. Fuck that shit. Fuck no. Let's decentralize the front ends in a way that cannot be, KYC'd. Let's do that. That seems like a really valuable goal. So to me, that's what I think about, like, what are the hair on fire problems of this industry that we need to be solving that better improves humans' access to empower themselves. This is why I'm so excited about the lending protocol, by the way, because the lending protocol is giving you no interest rates, no conditions, and no expiration date. So now you can actually buy a car. You can go on a vacation. You can buy a house with your crypto without dumping your crypto and selling it and removing your exposure to it. Because if you do that with Aave or Compound, you're just going to get fucking liquidated, right? People get liquidated. Anybody who's taking out a loan knows how stressful as fuck that is, right? Ethereum's price is going down. You're just dumping more ETH into it. Like, oh my God, am I going to lose all my Ether? It's stressful. And you really can't have it's great for degens to degen it up, but it's not a really good, useful thing to actually improve your actual life. To go out and buy a car. Like, a guy actually told me on Twitter Spaces the other day that he had 44 emails between him and a bank trying to get a $10,000 loan that he still hadn't gotten yet. And he tried to get a loan on Aave and he got one, but he felt so stressed out about it. He just closed it and I can't even do this. I'm just going to be I won't even be able to sleep at night. You know what I mean? And he's trying to buy a $10,000 car so he can get to work. And he was telling me that this loan is the exact thing he was looking for, because you can't get a loan like this in TradFi, CFI, or even DeFi. And it allows him to actually buy a car with his Bitcoin, right? And be able to know that his Bitcoin is available to him tomorrow, so that he can buy back his Bitcoin whenever the fuck he wants to do so. That's super empowering. That changes so much about this space in such a significant way, in my opinion. That's something to be proud about, something to be excited about. We all should be excited about the idea of being able to do that. Not only just do that loan attributes, but also do it in a cross-chain way with every major asset, including Bitcoin. That's so important. So that's what I think about.
That's lovely. I hope that, some the beginning remind me of Pale Blue Dot, Carl Sagan, when empowering, understanding that the problems we have are not really, the problems, but we should think of the bigger things. Last one, Chad, I promise. Give me one person, dead or alive, that is an inspiration to you. It could be a developer, it could be a writer, it could be an influencer, it could be a degen, it could be a book author, could be a movie maker, I don't know, dead or alive, Julius Caesar, I don't know, one person that inspires you.
One person that inspires me? I look to people one of the things I love about Steve Jobs, not just because he was obviously a great innovator and an inspiration for me and for countless other entrepreneurs, is that the way he thinks about the problem is so different. He thinks about, he used to say, if you want the next evolutionary step in your product, ask your customers. If you want the next revolutionary step, ask yourself, right? It's the idea that that all the things that do exist today around us are just temporary walls that can be knocked down anytime. Oftentimes you think about those things as just walls that exist and we can't go through them. But he was saying those walls were erected by people just like you, and they don't have to stay up, right? And I just love this concept of go back to first principles. What are the problems you want to solve? It doesn't matter that nobody else has solved it or thinks it's not possible to solve, right? THORchain solved the problem that people yelled at us, said it was literally not possible to solve. And go out there and innovate. Think of new ways, creative ways of making it work. That stuff is so inspirational. And I think Steve Jobs helped me to see that.
I love it. It's absolutely in the spirit of the podcast, I would say, for sure. In the spirit of crypto,
Yeah, absolutely.
Chad, thank you very, very much for coming. I know we went a little bit over time. I hope it's okay. Again, my gratitude, finally, we made it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Join us next time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
This content was created by the Citizen Cosmos Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating to Citizen Cosmos and help us to create more educational content.